The DCEU has had its ups and downs, well mostly downs, as it has been a rocky 10 years for this franchise, as it has had to compete with Marvel. But with The Flash coming out recently and doing a weird sort of reset for the DCEU, I want to go back and rank every DCEU movie. First off, ground rules, we're only going to rank DCEU movies, so no Matt Reeves Batman or Joaquin Phoenix Joker. Also, for all these movies, I am watching the director's cut if there's an available option, so 3-hour version of Batman v Superman and the 4-hour version of Justice League, baby. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's get on with last place. Last place is Suicide Squad. I don't feel I have that much to say about this movie that hasn't been said before because yeah, it's awful. Joker has a terrible design, the entire plot is nonsensical, the story is barely coherent, and the tone is clearly all over the place due to studio interference, and this is just also one of the most poorly edited films I've ever seen. There are some bright spots in here like Harley Quinn and Will Smith being likable enough-ish to pull you out of a sleep-induced coma, but this movie is just horrible and comes in last place easily since it's the only movie on this list that I genuinely question if it counts as a film. It might as well be a 2-hour music video with how much random music's put into it, but yeah, this movie is awful, it easily comes in the last place, but coming in at number 12 is the Man in Black himself, Black Adam. Yeah, I hate this movie, and it's because it's not even a movie, it's a vessel for The Rock's ego. He thought he could make a movie about him being an awesome superhero, and his pure willpower and name alone could make it a sensation. And it's just awful. A terrible yes man director directs the entire thing, there's no personality in this entire film, and it looks awful from start to finish. It has easily the worst villain in the DCEU, yes, even worse than Suicide Squad because I don't even remember his name. It's just this red PS2 character that fights Black Adam at the end. At least in Suicide Squad I remember the villain is Enchantress. This one, I don't even know what red guy is. And this movie just makes me mad because DC thought that this was okay, that this type of movie was good enough and that people would actually tune into a universe of movies that would be this quality for the foreseeable future. I am so glad it bombed because I don't think I could take a DC universe where The Rock is basically the main character. If you want to hear more of my thoughts, you can watch the video I made back when the movie came out on how much I disliked it, but yeah, the only good thing to come out of this movie was that it ego checked The Rock to such a degree that he's back in Fast and Furious, so that's something, but this movie is truly horrible, and no other movie on this list is so bad Warner Brothers fired the main DC executives to hire someone else to completely reboot the universe. Do you know how bad your movie has to be to get the entire company to reboot your universe? That is impressive. Anyways, on to number 11. Number 11 is gonna go to Shazam! Fury of the Gods. You know that scene in Good Burger where the guy gives the guy the burger with nothing on it? Yeah, that's this movie. I don't have much to say about it because it's just so boring and empty. I think the problem with this movie is that they're making a sequel to a movie that never needed one. The entire gimmick of the first movie was that it was about a kid learning to be a hero. But now that he already knows how to be one, there's just nothing for him to do other than have him fight evil Helen Mirren and Lucy Liu riding a dragon. It's just so empty and forgettable, and I don't really feel like putting it any higher because I watched it a day ago and I don't remember anything that happened really. So I'm not going to dedicate any more time to this part of the video. None of you saw this movie, and when you click off the video, you'll already forget this movie existed. But what I'll never forget was this scene from the first film to break into our top 10, and that is The Flash. Oh yeah, this movie's a real type of bad. So the latest film in the DCEU might be the most disappointing movie they've ever made. Flash is my favorite DC character, and to see his film adaptation be this lifeless, terribly shot and acted bland mess, it's just really depressing. The entire film doesn't even seem finished with terrible CGI, bland cinematography, and a story that was rewritten so many times that it doesn't even feel coherent. It has no flow or narrative direction, it just smash cuts to new ideas and new scenes with no connecting tissue. It ends up just creating this awful Frankenstein monster of a movie till it stumbles towards the end and just abruptly leaves off on one of the most unsatisfying endings I've seen in a while. And the movie truly baffles me that it has this poor of direction since it's directed by Andy Muschietti, who has made really good things. He made It, you know, one of the most visually and pop culturally iconic horror films of the last few years. It Chapter 1 is one of my favorite horror movies ever, and I thought he could just bring that originality and direction of The Flash, but all of the creative and directive choices here just feel so bizarre and out of place. The Speed Force and the way it's shown is really strange and feels like one of the worst ways to depict running through time. The cameos as well are abysmal, and some of them just feel grossly misused, and the main villain, if you can even call them that, is just awful. This movie has no story, no direction or style, and tries to compensate that by putting references and cameos in to make it work, and it just falls so flat. This movie is an embarrassment and feels like 7 chewed up pieces of gum stuck together. Now you might be wondering, how did it get above the other 3 movies below it? And that's just because I did like the original beginning of this movie. movie. I think for the first like 30 minutes, it's pretty fun, with Flash just doing normal adventures with Ben Affleck Batman, and I had more fun in that segment alone than I did in any of the 3 movies below it. Well, with the movies before it on this list, this movie's gonna look like Citizen Kane, so I guess number 9 is gonna go to Batman v Superman 3-hour rated R more Batjail edition. Now this one is also pretty bad. Trust me, there's a lot of bad movies on this list, but you know what? I'll take this movie over what's below it because Zack Snyder actually knows how to make a movie, and he's actually trying. Zack Snyder actually knows the fundamentals of filmmaking, and the movies below this one just do not have that. Still, this isn't a very good movie. It's basically everything I don't want from a Batman or Superman film. Every character in this film is completely unlikable, and it's a movie where we have no one to cheer for, which is actually impressive when you're adapting 3 of the most likable characters in all of comics. And that's because the entire story is based mostly on the 2 DC comic books famous for deconstructing Batman and Superman. Batman v Superman adapts the Death of Superman comic book and The Dark Knight Returns, which are both 2 great comic book stories, but they are about breaking these heroes down to their core, and that storyline fundamentally does not work when we've only had 1 film with Superman, and this is our introduction to Batman. It ends up making these characters feel wrong. Superman is an emotionless weirdo, and Batman is an evil murderer who will brand people so they get murdered in jail. It's this dark political nightmare movie for the first 70%, and then in the last third it turns into this kaiju film with Wonder Woman popping out of nowhere, as the 3 of them are now buddies, and they're supposed to fight this gloop monster. It's what happens when you try to cram everything into one movie. You can't have a sequel to Man of Steel, The Death of Superman, The Dark Knight Returns, and the introduction to Batman, along with the introduction of Wonder Woman, Lex Luthor, and the entire Justice League in one movie. It just doesn't work. It's a movie structurally and tonally that is all over the place, but hey, Zack Snyder sure can direct a movie, because this movie looks really good. I love how he imagined Batman and his version of Gotham. I love the fight with Superman. I love how the kryptonite looks when Batman's fighting him. I even like his Lego Batman suit that looks silly, and the movie just looks great other than that weird sludge monster at the end, and I kinda dig as well the Junkie XL Batman theme and a lot of the music overall. This movie might be a mess, but hey, it's at least a really good looking and sounding one. Lex Luthor still sucks though. Alright, number 8's gonna get me some heat because I know a lot of people love this movie, but number 8 is gonna be Man of Steel. Yeah, this one just isn't one of my favorites, and I want to say it's completely personal, but it really isn't, since this is a big mess of a movie and it doesn't really know what it wants to be. Zack Snyder wanted to take the idea of what if an alien showed up in our civilization as seriously as possible. So there's catastrophic damage, huge fights, a lot of mythological references for Superman. This film is going for a darker and more serious tone to reflect the horror of aliens coming to Earth, and it just doesn't work when you're making a Superman movie. It puts this movie into a weird limbo of trying to have its cake and eat it too. It wants there to be these huge devastating battles, but it wants everyone still to view Clark as this nice local kid who's a real hero. We see at times the nice friendly kid who wants to help people and save school buses, but when the real action starts, all of Superman's actions just don't reflect that of someone who actually wants to save people. Like this scene, Superman, you didn't even try. There are people who are now dead in that building. And I know everyone talks about him destroying all of Metropolis without any regard for human life, and yeah, I completely agree with that, but I just don't want to completely dump on this movie, because there is stuff I like in it. I like all the scenes where he's being nice and just helping people. I like the scene where he learns how to fly. Basically, I like any scene where he's acting like Superman and not some weird alien who's knocking down buildings like they're bowling pins. Listen, if you love this movie and this interpretation of Superman, that's great, but this version of Superman genuinely makes me sad since he's such a jerk and such a cold alien. I want Superman to be a kind farm boy kid who's about truth, justice, and a better tomorrow, and this movie's just the exact opposite of that, so it's just not my thing. Also, this movie convinced the public that Superman is boring, and that is just so wrong. So yeah, screw this movie, it doesn't deserve to go any higher. I'm gonna go get some IHOP now. Now, number 7's gonna go to Wonder Woman 1984, and honestly, quality-wise, this should probably be below Man of Steel, but I have just way more fun watching this movie. Now, it is a very, very flawed movie, whether it be a choppy pacing or a confusing MacGuffin plot or a bizarre implementation of Steve Trevor into the story. There is a plethora of problems in this movie for armchair critics to point out. But there is a lot about this movie that I dig. First off, the look of the movie and just how vibrant it is. It's really fun to go to the complete thematic opposite for a sequel, and I love how much this dives into the complete opposite of the 1917 World War I setting and just goes straight into the 80s. Now, I was born 2 decades after the 80s. I have no attachment to it, but to be honest, I like how they actually implemented it and just didn't make it completely nostalgic. They actually implemented a lot of the themes of greed and excess from that time period into the thematic underlying of the story. And I also like how that ties into the main villain, who's played by Pedro Pascal, and he is actually the real reason this movie is above Man of Steel, because his performance alone here is so good here he had to get back surgery from carrying this entire movie. But also Gal Gadot and Chris Pine as Diana and Steve are as charming as ever as they are in the first one, and they just make this movie more watchable than the films below it. Still, this movie is way too long, it's really bloated, it has bizarre character usage, and honestly a pretty bad villain with Cheetah, and just a story that makes no sense when you think about it for more than a minute. in it, and while this movie might be more flawed than Man of Steel, honestly, I'd rather watch this movie any day of the week over Man of Steel. Now, number 6 is Aquaman. Now, I have to put this movie higher than everything below it because this is the first movie in this list to actually have a real clear identity. James Wan actually knows how to make a movie with actually its own style and character. Just look at these wide lens, one-take action scenes. You got octopuses playing a drum, you got these giant crab people, dark, creepy monsters, you got Nicole Kidman on Dinosaur Island, and don't even forget Black Manta. I thought there was no way they could adapt Black Manta and not make him look goofy, but this is completely comic accurate, and it looks great. Cinematography is actually really good and vibrant. This movie's got great action, fun set pieces, and every idea that they could put into this movie was. I don't think a single thing was left on the cutting room floor, and I think that's the biggest problem of this movie. It is just so bloated. There are too many plot lines, too many villains, and the whole story just feels too convoluted. One moment we're in Africa, then a random Italian village, then we're on an evil boat, and there's Lovecraftian monsters, then we're on Dinosaur Island, then we are fighting for a trident, and then we have this endgame style war at the end where I have no clue what is happening, but you know what? The movie looks great, the action is fun, and the characters are fun enough that you can almost turn your brain off and just go for the ride. Is this the perfect movie? No, far from it, but it has heart, and it's actually really trying, so for that alone it gets higher than most of the other DCEU movies. Number 5 is gonna go to Shazam. This movie's just a solid little superhero film. It has a cute little story of a kid learning how to be a superhero, and it's about all the fun stuff a kid would do with superpowers. Now, I don't have a ton to say about this movie. It's just pretty solid. It's got a few blemishes here and there. It's got Zachary Levi pretending to be a kid, which can get old after about 7 minutes, and the villain is about as interesting as my tax returns, and it can lag in certain parts of the movie, but this is just a solid little superhero movie. It achieves everything it sets out to be. It has fun scenes, most of the characters are pretty charismatic, has a lot of fun action scenes. It's just fun to see a kid just learning how to be a superhero. It's just a really fun, solid movie, and you know what? Sometimes that's enough. Number 4 is Birds of Prey, and this movie rules, and I'm gonna explain why, because I know all of you are absolutely confused on how it made it this high. First off, visually, this movie is a treat, whether that be through the cinematography or the editing. I love how the cinematography brings the world of Gotham here to life. I love how the editing puts the story in this weird context of Harley Quinn telling it, and every scene is just the most vibrant rendition of Gotham, and the direction of the film overall just exudes style and charisma throughout. And that's because you have Harley Quinn as your main character, and it is no surprise to anyone that Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn is probably the best thing to happen in the DCEU. She is perfect in the role, and my biggest complaint about the movie is that it doesn't focus on her enough. If this was a straight up Harley Quinn movie, it would be way better, but it's this weird mix mash between a Harley Quinn movie and a Birds of Prey movie, and while that does hold the film back a bit, the amount of style and action and hilarious comedy just makes this film a blast to watch. Also, it has Ewan McGregor playing Black Mask, and that is just amazing. I watched this movie for the first time for this video, and honestly, this is the film out of all of them I want to go back and rewatch because this movie was so original, and I just had a really good time with it. I just wish it was a bit more focused, but hey, speaking of unfocused, coming in at number 3 is the 4-hour rated R version of Justice League. This movie for me is always an internal conflict. First of all, it straight up rules. It's a huge sprawling epic with a huge story with actual good character development for every member of the Justice League and gives them all compelling motivation and characterization, but it's also just so long for a freaking Justice League movie. It is 4 hours and it could easily be 3. There are so many scenes that just go on forever and absolutely ruin the pacing of the movie for no reason. It also insists upon itself.
It insists upon itself, Lois.
What?
It insists upon itself.
What does that even mean?
Because it has a valid point to make. It's insistent.
It takes forever getting in, and you spend like 6.5 hours, and then, I can't even get through. I can't even finish the movie. I've never even seen the ending.
You've never seen the ending?
Some of these scenes are here for no reason other than Zack Snyder wanted to do it, and since it was his director's cut, no one said no. So it's a weird movie, because yeah, it's good and has an actual vision, but at the same time, I don't want to watch this again. Also, something I think that's weird about this movie is that the first good Justice League movie, adapting all these characters who were in Super Friends, is this rated R 4-hour film not for kids at all. Like, I don't know how that happened. That's just weird to me still. It's like if they said they were making a 4-hour rated R Voltron film. Like, isn't that strange? Anyway, release the 3-hour cut, Zach, then I'll watch it again. Until then, I'm gonna watch Lego Batman again, because that's a way better movie with the Justice League. And anyways, on to number 2. Number 2 is Wonder Woman, and that is because it is such a breath of fresh air. This movie is so unique in the DCEU, since it's the first movie that was genuinely good. I mean, with the DCEU's original track record, it seems like an impossibility that they could make a good movie, but this movie changed that narrative for about 5 seconds before the original cut of Justice League came out.
What is wrong with your face?
And that's just because it's a really good movie. Wonder Woman is so good because it just has a strong, consistent tone, a unique visual look, fun characters, and a really engaging story. This movie is the definition of a 7 out of 10 comic book movie, and in the DCEU that shoots you right up to number 3 instantly, and when your only competition for the number 2 spot is a 4-hour Justice League movie that I'm never gonna watch again, I'm gonna give you the edge. So congrats, Wonder Woman, for being one of the genuinely good DC movies. But it can't be number 1 since number 1 is truly a great film, and that is The Suicide Squad. This is my favorite DCEU movie by a mile, and it's not even close. I have now had 2 videos at this point dedicated to my love for this movie, and that's just because it's easily one of the best DC movies to come out in the last 15 years. It has a real unique visual identity, some actual characters, and a tight story that is all about highlighting and elevating our characters while not ever skimping out on huge set pieces and incredible action. This film is what the DCU should have strived for, a really unique take by a strong director, and not the usual bland mess. I adore The Suicide Squad, and when this franchise eventually reboots, I hope James Gunn can lead DC like he did with this movie to make each film as incredible and an individual and unique of a movie as he did with this one. And I know he'll do that in the future by getting really strong directors, and the guy who directed The Flash is now going to direct the new Batman movie. Oh, it's going to be another long 15 years.